Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of What's Happening. I'm George Spins, and I'm here with my co-host, Elliot Margolis, and we have as our guest this evening, Kirstin, I did it again.
That's okay.
I got a one-track mind. Kirstin Shapiro, who is the candidate for City Council Ward 3. Welcome.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you so much.
So we get to the obvious question, why are you running?
Why am I running? There's a lot of reasons why I'm running. I've always been really passionate about civil service and giving back to my community. And the main reason I really feel strongly about running here in Beverly is it's my home. It's where I want to raise my family and where my husband and I bought our first home. And I want to be able to give back to the community as it's given us so much and make sure that it's affordable going forward for the people who currently live here, reside here, and the people who'd like to make this their home. So,
I'm glad you brought up affordable because that brings up one of my questions. We have a mayor who has never seen a tax he doesn't like. And he's added the CPA, the food tax. He's always making sure that when new taxes come up, we can increase our tax rate by 2.5%. He does it whether we need it or not. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say I don't know as much about the history of the tax increases. I can say in general, when purchasing my home, I noticed how quickly the taxes had gone up on the property that I was about to purchase when I purchased. I think that, there's reasons why taxes need to be increased, and the city's growing pretty rapidly, so there are good reasons to increase taxes as long as the citizens really feel like it's being put to good use within the city. I know that the city had to transition their 401k plans or pension plans for the city. So I think that process kind of put the city a little behind trying to figure out how we were going to manage the pension programs going forward. And after that got redone, there was a goal to make sure that the city had a bit of a cushion, a savings fund, for the unfortunate circumstance when the economy does turn down or if the economy turns down. So I think when taxes are levied, it just needs to be really transparent to the citizens why. And that communication is really on city councilors and the mayor's office to explain why the budget's shifting. Why are we increasing certain budgets? Why are we decreasing others? Why are we increasing taxes? And where exactly are those funds going to be going to?
Well, Ward 3 that you're going to represent is kind of a strange ward because it starts downtown and it runs all the way out to 128.
Right.
So you've got a kind of a wide span of people and interests in there. Where do you think the biggest problems are?
So I think one of the wonderful things about Ward 3 is how unique it is because we do have the high school, the middle school, and some of the elementary education. We also have a lot of the affordable housing, a lot of rental units, a lot of homeowners, and we have the Cummings Center, which is a huge point of commerce for the city. I think that means that whoever is the councilor for the city really needs to be thinking about building coalitions in those groups, making sure that the community of citizens who reside there feels connected to, the school system in the city, but also feels connected to the Cummings Center and that Commerce Center. How are we going to make those all sort of blend together to work in unison as opposed to sort of pulling in different directions? The proposal right now for the police station is also to go in right next to the Cummings Center, which is also part of Ward 3. So it's a challenge. I think sometimes an underestimated challenge compared to some of the other wards. It really does offer a lot, which means there's a lot more to think about as you choose to move forward on infrastructure, on housing and affordability, zoning, especially as we're doing the master plan moving forward. How are we going to think about the zoning of Ward 3? Some of it is downtown, some of it is commerce, some of it is schools, some of it's right at the highway, and it's really sort of a spot of point of transition for people.
Well, you've mentioned affordable housing a couple of times. And this is one of my pet peeves with the city, that there are a lot of people that are working here in the so-called vibrant community, which means the service industry. I would like to see affordable housing that is really affordable to those kind of jobs that people that work in the city can live here.
Yeah.
And same thing, the concern I'm getting into is the building on Rantoul Street, which is part of the ward, is aimed at commuters from Boston. At what point do we say that, hey, we've got enough of that kind of housing, and now we've got to do something different? You mentioned zoning. How comfortable are you with zoning changes like putting a small house in somebody's backyard?
Right. So one of the really advantageous ideas of, I can't remember the name of it, but it's when you either add an apartment onto your home or you make a secondary unit or in the home. There's zoning laws around doing that, or small houses on properties of other houses. They call them mother-in-law suites sometimes.
Yeah. In-law apartments, yeah.
Or in-law apartments.
Yeah.
There is a really good use for those going forward, and right now the zoning limits it usually to family members. Salem is actually doing a lot of work to try to change their zoning to afford for these units to be able to be built on people's property, so people who currently live in a 5-bedroom home, say, who are retiring, can transition into a mother-in-law suite in that same area, on that same house, or in the backyard of that home. And then their family, potentially, their younger children, who are now becoming professionals and adults, can afford to stay in the home and maintain the home. So it does offer an option for housing that I think we need, and affordable housing, especially for our retirees, to potentially be able to stay close to their kids. I know one of the things I've heard door knocking from a lot of people is they can't afford to downsize, and also their children who were born and raised in Beverly can't afford to move to Beverly now that they're grown up and they want to be able to purchase a home, live with their kids, or raise a family in Beverly. They can't afford to do that. And that, I imagine, is pretty heartbreaking, being a new citizen to Beverly. I can't imagine to grow up here and love this city and want to be able to move back to it and not be able to afford to. And other than that, so the affordable... There's affordable housing, and then there's affordability.
Yeah.
And I think what a lot of people miss is that point in between, that middle % of the population that really is working 40-hour work week, working pretty hard, making $40,000 or $50,000 a year, and they're cost burdened. So they're spending more than 30% of their income on their home. And sometimes my husband and I fall into that. So, right now, my husband and I are cost burdened with our home. We're fortunate enough to actually be in a home that we pay a mortgage on, so we have equity, which is a relief. In the past, when we were renters, it's pretty tough to be paying rent that's 50% of your income and then try to save. And so I think moving forward, the city needs to be really conscious about how we're building and what we're building. And with this Rantoul development, I actually spoke at the planning board meeting for the Depot 2. And, what I think is great is that we do need to build more. But as we're doing that, making sure there's a coalition with MassDOT and the state level to make sure that even makes sense on an infrastructure level. Because a lot of those trains leaving that depot right now are full or standing room only, especially by the time they get to Salem. Yeah. So if we're not making sure we're sort of working in tandem with these other departments that would require more growth in that area of town, then it's sort of it might end up being kind of a disaster that snowballs out of control, I think, faster than we realize.
Okay, but when you're talking growth, there's two kinds of growth.
Mm-hmm.
There's residential growth and there's commercial growth.
Right.
And when you talk residential growth, you're talking about costing the city money. For instance, how many kids do you have?
None.
Okay. You're an exception to the rule. Bad example. Let's just say in Beverly now it costs ballpark $15,000 a year to educate a kid.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So you got 2 kids. So you own a house and you're paying $6,000
mm-hmm.
in taxes, but the city is paying $30,000 in educating your 2 kids.
Mm-hmm.
So having more residential property is actually costing the city money. So that's not really the type of growth that we need. So the question is, Beverly is the birthplace of the American Navy, although most people don't know that. Okay? Why don't they know it? Because nobody in Beverly knows where Glover's Wharf is, or that the old McDonald's is still there doing absolutely nothing.
Right. You should take me on a tour sometime, Elliot. I feel like you probably got some good history.
Is she calling me old? But the point is that we have history in this city. I said to Mayor Scanlon on this show many moons ago, Beverly is the city that people drive through to go from Salem to Gloucester. Okay.
I don't think so.
What is there in Beverly that attracts you to come and visit the city? We have no hotels. We have, nothing but we're the birthplace of the Navy.
Oh, I mean, I think we have a lot of really wonderful parks. I think Lynch Park is beautiful. I think
But
Dane Street Beach is really nice.
People on vacation don't go to the park.
Well, as
That's
someone,
not the kind of growth.
yeah, I would say I definitely remember coming down as a kid and going to the North Shore Music Theater. So I definitely remember coming specifically to Beverly as a kid. And I knew of Beverly more than I knew of Gloucester. And of course, who doesn't learn about Salem? And I think when I was in middle school, I came down on a field trip to Salem. So I think a lot of people know Salem, and it's sort of a hot spot to visit. But I do think Beverly is starting to become known as a place where there is a good arts and culture scene. Montserrat College obviously is here, College of Art. The North Shore Music Theater, the Cabot Theater is starting to bring in some really wonderful music. And obviously they have the Dollar Movie Nights, which is wonderful for the community. So I do think that there is a level of arts and culture that has a good reputation in the North Shore and definitely in New England. So the North Shore Music Theater is an equity theater, which, is a good thing to have. There's not that many equity theaters in the area. So really for people from New Hampshire and Vermont and Maine who are wanting to come down for entertainment, the North Shore Music Theater is actually like a really great location to see some really quality entertainment.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I guess my question would be, would you be in favor of creating something like they have in Plymouth where we build a replica of the ship Hannah on Glover's Wharf? You know where Glover's Wharf is?
I don't know where Glover's Wharf is, no.
Okay. You know where the Beverly Salem Bridge?
Yeah.
Okay, the old McDonald's.
Mm-hmm.
That's Glover's Wharf.
Okay.
Okay?
Yep.
So building something like that, attracting people to Beverly, building hotels, or they're building a Hampton Inn in downtown Salem.
Yeah, I mean,
that helps with the commercial bringing money into the city.
Right. I do think that, this is part of the master plan process, is figuring out, as far as industry goes and commerce goes, how are we going to accommodate for that, or how do we want to build that going forward? So I do think it's something that's very much part of that master plan process and going to be very important for the person who's moving into city council and for the next city council to be getting out and talking to constituents and finding out, what do you think? What do you want to see for the city? Maybe some people don't want to see that. Maybe people don't want it to get any busier. As it is right now, I think it's a really wonderful place to go have dinner. I think it's a great night out on the town. There's tons of live music. I know people who have moved here specifically because there's live music in Beverly. So I don't necessarily think we're missing anything except, maybe some marketing to other areas in New England to let them know, hey, we're here and we actually have some pretty cool stuff to look at. Because we do. I mean, the Balch House is right by my home, and I think stuff like that is really interesting. I've been on the tour there and actually volunteered helping do some recycling cleanup and litter cleanup, and it was a great experience. And it's a really beautiful treasure that the city has that we could market more, and I think the Historical Society has done a really, really good job growing in the past few years and starting to do more outreach to the community and outside the community to bring people in for those reasons.
Well, you mentioned one term that surprised me. What is an equity theater?
So equity is the union, is the actors union.
Okay.
And equity theaters, when you're in sort of downtown cities, usually all the actors in those theaters are equity actors, which means they've been doing it for a long time. They're usually auditioned out of New York City.
They're professionals.
They're professionals. They're professional artists.
Like Gloucester has a theater that's a lot of amateurs.
Right. Yeah. As opposed to amateur theater, it's professional theater. So, North Shore Music Theater goes down to New York for every single round of auditions. So any show that you see up there, there's actors coming in from New York City, and also people from the community as well. So.
Well, but getting back to the breadth of Ward 3, which is, I think, is the major issue, is that this diversity of interest in that area. You're pushing a lot of touristy kinds of interests.
Well, I think you might be a ward councilor, but you still have to think globally.
Think about the whole city. For sure.
But at the same time, these kinds of service industries don't drag in the salaries that you can afford to live here. So some part of this game is, how do you get to the point where you have businesses that are paying enough that people can afford to live here, and we don't get ourselves into a situation where everybody's commuting, either commuting to Boston to make the money to live here, or when the day of work is done, they're commuting back to some other city.
Right. I think so. This is one of the inflection point for me that made me want to run for city councilor. I think that people who are police officers and teachers and firefighters in this town should be able to live in this town. Service industry professionals, entrepreneurs who are opening small shops downtown, I think they should be able to afford to live here. And I know that there's some people who have opened shops that have had to move out of Beverly because it wasn't affordable. And I think that this is not something that's isolated to Beverly. This is something that has happened in most major cities in the country, and it starts in the cities and then kind of broadens out. And so now the North Shore, even western parts of outside Boston and southern parts to the south of Boston, they're all starting to be developed more. And part of that is because 60% of the U.S. population in the last 50 years has moved to urban areas. So there is an influx of people moving to these areas, and as the baby boomers start to retire, then their income also changes. So you have this coupling of tons of population flooding to urban centers or urban areas, which Beverly is considered as sort of an urban outlie to Boston. And then you also have people retiring who are lowering their income and want to be able to downsize. So you kind of have these two populations looking for the same size housing or similar housing. And the reality is the wealth in this country is shifting to the top percentages. And, even a family of two, so 2 children and a parent, to live in Essex County, it has to make $74,000 a year. And I don't know that many single people, especially single people with children, who make that much money. That's a lot of money to make. And that's what you need to be able to, pay for the basics, food and a roof over your head. And so for me, the city really has to make some big decisions. The community has to make some big decisions. How are we going to grow, and who do we want to be able to afford to live here? And I personally come from a working background. I come from a low-income family. And I would like to see the people who work hard in this city be able to afford to stay here. And that means properly zoning the city, making sure we're being mindful about how and when and where we're raising tax levels, how we're building commerce, where we're building commerce, and how we're utilizing the 5 train stations. Are we utilizing them well for commuters? There are some people who commute and, they have a very low footprint as far as carbon footprint goes. They don't even have a car maybe, or they have one car for a large family. So those aren't necessarily bad things to have people commuting in and out of the city, as long as it's making sense as far as the infrastructure goes. Yeah, and I think you can't just build more buildings or build more housing. You have to build the right kind of housing. And I think that it's well within the bounds of the city to work with contractors to make sure if we're building a building, yes, you can charge this amount, but should you just because you can? The city can do things to make zoning so that we can have differing levels of income in a singular building, which is something that I'm a big advocate for. How do we make sure that we're not making cluster neighborhoods of socioeconomic sort of disparity? And how do we take care of everyone as the whole? Because when everyone's doing better, everyone's doing better. It's not a one person wins and one person loses. I really genuinely think when we think smart about things, everybody can end up on the winning side of it.
Well, that raises 2 issues, I guess. That one is, the way the zoning is set right now, if you build an apartment or a condo complex down on Rantoul Street, the zoning laws require you have 1 parking space for every apartment, which implies 1 car. And if you have a 2-earner family, it sort of forces you into the game of somebody's taking the train. Okay. That's all well and good, but if somebody is taking the train, the other car, is it available to do things like shopping? The other half of the game is on Rantoul Street, there isn't a market.
Right.
And there are lots of things.
There is one that should be going in, though, so... it will be quite a posh market. I don't know that I'll be able to afford to go there very often, but there will be a market going in. So.
And again, that's part of how the zoning gets set up, that if you force the prices up, the price of the land goes up, you have to put in expensive apartments who afford to put something on the land. So this is a snowballing kind of thing. So the other half of this game is there needs to be some sort of infrastructure around so you can get from one place to another. A jitney service, a bus service. Can't wait until the autonomous cars get here. And you just dial one up on your cell phone. So something has to be done there, and yet we're tearing up the city. And
yeah, I think so. I had a really nice chance to sit down with Beverly Crossing and talk for a couple hours, actually, about sort of some of the obstacles they face in building with the zoning as we have it, and reasons why they charge how they charge and why they build how they build. And the parking came up as one of those, sort of points that they made. I actually think it's more than one car per. They have to build, I think, 1.25 or 1.5 parking spots.
Depends on what area they're in.
Yeah, and so they don't need that. So that is an opportunity where if the city can change a zoning law, it sort of provides them a little more wiggle room financially to potentially build, differently how they build on that site. I think that one of the major issues and why this kind of happened is because the master plan really should have taken place prior to this development. And it's sort of an unfortunate thing from the past, and we can't go back and fix how it didn't get done, but we're in it right now. And I do think it's a moment where the city might reflect on kind of holding off on any more major developments until we find out what we're going to do as far as adding buses, or are we going to have a bike rental where you can, rent a bike at the train station and bike to Cummings Center if that's where you work. So I think that's, I think moving forward quickly when we're in the process of doing a lot of data research and analytics on what's working and what's not seems kind of silly. It seems like you're skirting around this big project we're working on. And I think that first we should figure out the data behind it, because I'm really a fan of moving pragmatically forward. And you can't really do that without the information that you need.
One of the things that I've suggested before, and usually if I suggest it, it doesn't happen, but Rantoul Street and Cabot Street run parallel to each other.
Is this the one way?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
I've heard this before, yeah.
It would accomplish a couple things. Number one is there's so many more apartments now on Rantoul Street, there's going to be more traffic. If you did the one way on both streets, you could even do diagonal parking, which would make it more parking spaces.
Right.
How do you feel about that concept?
I mean, I think in general there needs to be a citywide, totally inclusive traffic study done. And I don't know if that's something that's going to come out of the master plan or not, but I definitely think that would be helpful information. Is it worth making those one way? Would it really affect a great change, or would it actually cause more issues? Sometimes one ways end up being really beneficial and creating a better traffic flow, and sometimes they end up sort of clogging traffic even further. So I don't know. The answer for that is I don't know on that one. I do think that as a counselor, knowing who you should be looking to for answers, there are city planners and there are engineers, civil engineers, who know what they're talking about. And it's important that we have people on city council listening to the constituents and what the constituents need, and also listening to the professionals who really know how to fix these problems. And when they give us the advice that we're looking for, taking it and doing something with it, not just waiting for someone to kind of bring it forward. But, once you have the information, you can move forward. And if we don't, sometimes, so I've been going to city council meetings since January. And for me, I think one of the more frustrating moments for me sitting, and watching them, and they're all so thoughtful, and I'm so proud to see the amazing service that they're giving the city. I see a cautionary sort of step forward sometimes when they want to introduce an idea or really put their backbone behind something. And I think that the city suffers when we hesitate. And if you're worried about being reelected, or you're worried about putting your foot in your mouth, sometimes it means things don't get done. And I don't think it's the worst thing in the world to, stumble sometimes on the way to figuring things out in the positive. So I think, for me, I think being bold is a big part of why I'm running. It doesn't mean that I'm going to spear into city council, in a burst of flames. It's more just, here's the data, here's the information. I would like to let my passion fuel the pragmatism, and make sure that we're moving forward when we have real decisions to make and we have the information to make them thoughtfully.
Okay. Time is running low, but
Okay.
I've got one more question, and then I'm going to ask you to just tell us why everybody should vote for you.
Okay.
But you mentioned the idea of people are worried about getting reelected. So question number one, how do you feel about term limits? And then after you're through with that, tell us a little bit about why you're the right candidate for Ward 3.
So term limits, I feel pretty strongly about term limits. I really think that the energy and the dynamics that you can bring to your service, it will push the needle so far, and then it's time to step aside and let other people, other thoughts, other opinions kind of add to the melting pot. So I think term limits are a fantastic thing. I don't know what those would look like exactly, but I do think, you know, in my mind, 6 years, 8 years on city council, that's what you were going to do, how you were going to think, and what you were going to bring forward. You've brought it forward. And I also think there's really wonderful people that I've met in the city who would love to serve, and giving them the opportunity to feel like it's even a viable opportunity is something that I think term limits allow, is more people to get involved in the process. And when you have more opinions and more thought, you come out with better, more all-inclusive solutions. What was the other question?
The other question was, in the last 2 minutes, tell us why you should be elected to Ward 3 Council.
Okay. I don't know if I should look at the camera. I'll look at you guys.
I'll
talk to you guys.
Can look at the camera.
It's easier if I have faces to put to it. You know, currently the city council doesn't have an outsider. It doesn't have somebody who is recently moved here, is part of the population that is coming into town. We have a lot of new residents, and I represent those new residents. My husband and I moved here 2 years ago. So my perspective, especially having lived in some big cities and suburbs of cities, and going through this process in other areas, I know where Beverly is at because I've lived through it in my life in other areas. And I think that I offer a perspective that isn't currently sort of available, and isn't available from the other candidates, but also isn't available even on the city council and from other candidates in other wards. So that's, to me, is very advantageous. I'm also a little bit younger. And I think that, you know, I bring an energy and a perspective as growing up in, you know, I got laid off in 2008. It was my first job. So I think I offer a younger, fresher take on what it looks like to be in this age group, in this demographic, which we are inviting into the city. And I grew up low income. So I'm thinking deeply and thoughtfully about affordability and a well-rounded approach to solving problems as opposed to plugging one hole at a time.
Oh, that was interesting, George.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming on the show. You got her name up there? Kirstin Shapiro.
Kirstin Shapiro.
See, George,
Why don't you just change your name and make it easy for all of us?
I know, right?
Kirstin Shapiro running for Council of Ward 3.
Yes,
replacing a really good guy by the name of Jim
Latter. Great.
Really good guy.
Good
Thank
service.
you for coming.
Thank you both so much.
And
I
good
really
luck.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.